So human ear and equalization. Where does human ear come from as well? You, as an operator, you have two pairs of ears. You don't have two pairs of microphones. You don't have an XLR connection on your head, right? So you have to understand how we hear sound. And as you know, right, everything that has to do with human perception is subjective. So it's good to recognize exactly how we hear sounds and have a good understanding of how that ties in with how we do in equalization. So putting things into a sonic perspective. So you can think of your ears essentially as, like just now I said, as microphones, but not in the technical sense. So as I said here, it's a very peculiar device. So it's not a normal microphone, but essentially it's just two omnidirectional. We covered that last week, right? Omnidirectional microphones. So what does omnidirectional mean? It means that the sound is picked up in generally, if you consider one ear only, a sphere all around it, and not like a here is not a carrier microphone. Yeah. Okay. So why is it so that why is it such that we're covering a year before jumping into equalization? Well, simply because we don't actually know what we how do I say this? We don't actually know what we are very limited to and what we are very sensitive towards. You're using your own ears and to mix for your audience, so it's a humanly resources for our humanly audience. Yeah, so as we said, it's subjective, so some of these, this is not the last word. You can go and as you go down in your soundman journey, you'll probably figure out a few more interesting details that are not mentioned here, so it's not an exhaustive list. Sensitivities. What are our ears extremely sensitive to that no other technical equipment are sensitive to? Some of you might have used audio editor before, digital audio workstation. There's something called noise reduction. So like all recordings have some kind of noise, and when you process the audio, you can cut out the noise. But it doesn't work very well. Okay, even the most amazing AI-driven plugins don't filter out noise as well as we do. So to give you an example, have you ever had a conversation in a really loud environment? Probably, right? And have you noticed that you don't really hear the noise at all, you only hear the conversation? And when listening to music, let's say it's a complex orchestra, a symphony orchestra, you can close your eyes and zoom into that one violin, right? Or that one particular element, as long as it's properly recorded. And you can completely block out the rest. Okay, why is this so important? Well, for the audience, you have to think in our perspective and their perspective. Okay, from our perspective, well, you don't actually have to EQ individually. You don't have to get the whole band to stop playing and only get maybe the vocalist to sing, and then you EQ, and then you move on to the percussionist, and then that's gonna take a long time and it's gonna be a waste of time. You can actually just zoom in or using your ability to focus on sounds. And for the audience, it's also, well, contrary the same. So they have the ability to pick out the problems in your mix. Okay, so you can have like a 5-6 element band, and you can have one maybe poorly mic'd, maybe it's crackling a little bit, or maybe the EQ is a little bit off. They're gonna zoom in right on that, and they're gonna be distracted by that for the whole show. And after the whole show, they don't care how wonderful the 5 instruments are mixed. They only care that the one that has a problem. Yeah. So I rather, what does that mean? I rather have you spend equal time on all the instruments rather than you focus on maybe a few, and then for the last one you just plug in and let's go. Okay. So you have to make sure that they are generally all evenly treated, or don't treat them at all. So they can be equally bad or equally good, but not yeah. So this is very important. Okay, so this is something that nobody has probably ever. You probably have seen this with term sound before. You've probably seen some kind of graph like this that has something to do with sound. Frequency response. I think it puts many things into perspective. When we talk about EQ, when we talk about room acoustics, when we talk about a microphone, a sound, every microphone also has a sound. There's different microphones, sounds different. This is not a pickup pattern. This is just a microphone sound. Same with loudspeakers. Like a small speaker is not different from a big speaker. Very simple term. So let's say you play the piano, you have like a key, maybe like your A, B, C, D, E, or F, G or something, and you play a certain key, it's a particular frequency. You can translate that to an actual number, like maybe like 400 something hertz. Okay, whatever your term pitch, tone, frequency, your keys, your notes, generally the same thing. Okay, a single frequency. Of course, music, complicated music has a whole bunch of frequencies in it, right? But in the very simple term, in the simplest sense, a frequency is just the singular pitch, like a fixed tone. Y'all ever heard that, right? And the higher the tone, like then the higher the frequency. Hello, welcome. We're recording actually, so just make sure you can get a good view of the screen, and yeah, any questions you can ask later. So frequency response just imagine, okay, you all know how to read graphs, right? This is the y-axis, this is the x-axis. And given a certain point, okay, let's pick, I don't know if y'all can see, this is what, okay, 500. I was talking about 500 just now, right? Like the frequency for, I don't know, piano or key. So you look at 500 hertz, you trace it upwards to where the graph line is, and you trace it to the y-axis. So at 500 hertz, it doesn't have to be exact, it's about 90 decibels. What does that mean? Well, let me give you an example. You have a speaker that plays a variety of frequencies, right? Speakers play every frequency that a human ear can hear. So at 500 hertz, this particular speaker is 90 decibels loud. And that means that if the volume is the same, right? Right now I take my phone and I play, unfortunately I can't take my phone. And I play a sine sweep. You know, have you heard the sound that goes from very low note to high note, like goes all the way up, right? Yeah. So at 500 hertz, that tone will be 90 decibels loud. I'm assuming you all know what decibels is, how loud things are. Okay. What does this mean though? So right now, if you look at the graph at 20,000 hertz, there's a big dip, right? It's a lot lower. See, the graph tilts downwards, right? What does this mean? Well, at the same volume, you don't change anything on your phone. You play a 20,000 hertz sound, and it's a lot softer on the decibel scale. Okay, the human ear hears things. The human ear, you know, the human ear also has a frequency response. We'll come to that later. So we're moving one step at a time. Okay, we'll just skip to the. We'll go to this first. Okay, ignore all the text. Look at this red graph thingy here. Okay, this is the frequency response of a human ear in reverse. A bit confusing, I know. There's a bit of technicalities here. Essentially, this is your EQ. One of these red lines. Okay, ignore all the rest because these are different volumes. One of these red lines is the EQ you're going to have to use to make the human ear sound flat. That's quite extreme, right, don't you think? Plus 20 decibels in the bass. That is because the human ear is very insensitive to the bass region. And if you look here, there's a big dip right here. There's a huge boost in the bass because our ears are not sensitive to the bass at all. And there's a big dip right here around the 3000 hertz region. You might have heard the term 3000 hertz because it's exactly where our ears are the most sensitive. So to demonstrate that, let me play you a tone. Okay, to illustrate to you what frequency response means. Does it sound louder? Yeah. Definitely right. That was very obvious to all of you, and you wouldn't want to hear this all day. Okay, you could hear 500 hertz all day, no problem, but you don't want to hear 3000 hertz. You don't want to hear 3000 hertz all day. That's frequency response for you. So if I were to draw the human ear frequency response, just by that, it's gonna be a flat line of a huge bump at 3000 hertz. You kind of get what I mean, right? Okay, now let's illustrate this in terms of speakers and microphones. Okay, microphones I think is kind of obvious to you. It's similar to a human ear. If a microphone has a huge bump somewhere, it means that you put the mic at 3000 hertz, it'll give you a super loud signal there and a softer signal elsewhere, right? Speaker is the other way around. So you kind of think in the terms of a reverse microphone or a reverse of a ear. So if a speaker has a bump at 3000 hertz, it simply means if you feed it a normal sound signal, okay, and the speaker has a bump at 3000 hertz, then it will make the 3000 hertz louder as it plays out the sound. Does it make sense? So your ear, it sounds louder because your ear records the sound and it records a louder 3000 hertz, even though it's a flat sound from the speaker. But if it's the other way around, the speaker has a bump in the frequency response, then when you play a normal sound, then you'll magnify the sounds in that region, that frequency region, the very harsh region that you just heard. And it can be any other frequency. It can be 500 hertz, which is generally more benign, nicer. You wouldn't really care, okay? But in that region, so why am I saying as well? When you equalize, you could probably realize that some sounds, some frequencies, the human ear doesn't really care. The human ear doesn't care if there is maybe a 5 decibel dip in the 800 hertz range, compared to a 5 decibel increase in the 3000 hertz range, because the ears are gonna die. Because everyone in this whole room, everyone in the whole auditorium has a similar bump in that frequency for the ear. So people get fatigued, get annoyed, get angry, I don't know, when they hear too much of that frequency, so just bear that in mind. So yeah, that's frequency response. We'll be talking everything in terms of this graph. So if you all have any problems right now, any questions right now, ask immediately, because this is going to be very important. Anything, any tiny doubt, anything that is not clear, you have to clarify right now. Yeah. Okay, so we'll be using this graph for the rest of using the term frequency response to explain everything else. Okay, I think let's just do one last revision. So when you look at this graph, right, Evidently, in the very low bass, you see the number 50 right here. Below 50 hertz, this particular device, speaker or microphone, it's very soft because the level drops off. So if this is you, then you literally won't hear any bass at all. And it's generally quite flat, but downwards trend you see is generally tilting down. And if you focus on the decibel level, okay, 10 dB is a lot. It's like from this to this. It's just a very approximate, but it's a pretty huge jump. So you can see flat, right? If you zoom up the scale, as you all know with graphs, you can change the scale of your GDT, right? It will get more dramatic. So always bear that in mind. I can make it 100 dB scale be just a straight line. Okay, so moving on. Yeah, we talked about this a little bit just now. Loudness is very important. So just now when you heard the 3000 Hz wasn't a very nice sounding frequency. Well, if I made it a little bit softer, it would be even worse. But at louder volumes, it generally evens out. Let me explain this to you. Frequency response of a human ear. You look at the red line at the very bottom. The lowest red line is how extreme you have to EQ for the ear to make it flat. You need the huge bass boost. Okay, massive, massive. And at the very highest volume, you see this is decibels of loudness. As the loudness increases, you see the graph doesn't stay the same or does it change? It evidently changes a lot. Okay. So not only is the human ear a terrible microphone in terms of frequency response, as we just discussed, it's also a broken microphone in the sense that it doesn't sound the same as you increase the volume. And this is a good generalization for every single human being. So that's why, okay, so it's a non-linear transducer. Transducer is simply what converts energy into another. So in terms of the ear, it's a sound energy to electrical energy that goes to your brain. Okay. Yeah, so, you know, often when you actually have a real concert, I don't know about you Founders Day people, but eventually when you get to those big concerts, you realize that the actual show often gets a lot louder than the rehearsal. Because all the audience are screaming, you have like the I don't know, your party vibes, and everyone's like using their phone. And you want to turn up the volume a little bit, okay? Not for chapel generally on the lower volume so they can sleep, but for like actual meaningful events, you'll find that you'll go a lot louder than you do in rehearsals. You think it's crazy to go so loud in rehearsals, for actual event you'll max it out. So bear in mind, when you're mixing during rehearsals, right, you want to note the frequencies that might sound bad if you increase the volume. Which particularly is the bass and the treble. Okay, this one I'll leave it out for now, you can find out on yourself later. Just know that there's a reason why sometimes you hear a recording, it sounds great at lower volumes. You increase the volume to max and it sounds horrendous. Not because something is broken, it's because of your ear. I mean, your ear is broken. Yeah, so I don't think I need to talk about this too much, but sorry about touch your screen. Hearing safety, okay. We talk about wear a mask and everything. You should actually wear a mask on your ears as you mix, you know, because it's irreversible damage. At least no remedy in the long run. So the more you listen to loud music, and you might think loud is very loud. No, loud is not loud at all. Normal volumes for extended time will slowly wear out your hearing day by day. So when you mix, right, just be not only for yourself, you are standing way back towards the back of the room. Okay, that's nice and soft. The audience at the first row is getting obliterated by the sound, and you want to be concerned about their hearing as well. Yeah, so it's your responsibility. Honestly, you're kind of responsible for their health in some ways. Okay, let's just be honest here. And, you can do some serious damage to the whole school if you like to blast them every day and every year. And people will complain because loud music is some people love it, especially if you mix it well. Some people don't like it, and it can be something called fatigue, listening fatigue. You can look that up yourself. Okay, let's move on. We don't need to hurry up a little bit here. Insensitive quality. So just now we were talking about the sensitive. Just now we were talking about the sensitive qualities of human hearing. Okay, now moving on to the insensitive qualities. Okay. A bit technical, like I said. I would love to let you do EQ right now on the speakers, but we'll get through this and we'll move on now. So just now I was talking about how the ear is very sensitive towards change in volume. We can focus on individual instruments and mix, and we can use it to our advantage. And we also have to bear that in mind that the audience can hear that as well. We know that the ear has many interesting qualities, okay, but there's also some things that the ear is basically completely deaf to, and we often think that those are the problems, and we go after those problems, but we can't even hear them really. So we have to get our priorities straight. That's the point. Okay, the ear is quite forgiving of frequency imbalances in its mix. What does that mean? You know that when you actually mic something on a stage and you actually measure the real frequency response, like for instance, if you put a flat speaker towards the mic, and you measure the frequency response from the main system, it's a horrible up and down valley. Much worse, right? then what you see here is probably like zing 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 zing. Okay, and it still sounds decent. Why is that so? Our ears are quite forgiving, like I said. We tend to iron out a little bit of the problems, but more importantly, we are not sensitive to something that we don't know how it sounds like. How do you know that I sound normal right now? Because you've probably heard the human voice. I know every voice sounds different, but there's a general consensus for the human voice. Something more dramatic, a guitar, a violin, a piano. If you EQ it wrongly, people will know instantly because they have heard a piano in real life. They know the brain has a memory, a sonic memory of a real guitar or whatever instrument. That's how we reference what is natural or not, simply on the basis that we've heard it without, like, someone actually playing a piano in front of you and your brain remembers the sound. If you pick a baby and someone who grows up having no idea what normal instruments will sound like whatsoever, they generally wouldn't know whether it sounds natural or not. It can sound good or bad, but they wouldn't know if it sounds correct. Okay, does that make sense? Your brain needs to have something to benchmark against to tell you whether the sound is right or not. So why does this matter? Well, we should pay more attention to the sounds that people have a good memory of. I ask you, it's probably still on the slides, but you have electronic dance music. You have symphony orchestra recording. Which one of these would you want to pay more attention to the EQ? Something that people actually know how it sounds like in real life, which is exactly. If you EQ the electronic music, I can tell you, go to your phone right now, you can dial in your EQ for your, what's the EDM, right? Yeah. You wouldn't know whether it's good or bad, it just sounds different. You think about it, if you boost the bass of a bass drum, it's too loud, it's too boomy. You boost the bass of EDM, well, it can be subjective. Some EDM don't have as much bass as the other, it doesn't, right? It's completely subjective. And so you have to focus on sounds that humans have good memories of, particularly instruments. Voices are, contrary to intuition, not so bad because everyone's voice sounds different. So you can make Irene Cole's voice sounds like some other person and people probably won't really care as long as it doesn't sound harsh or sibilant. Okay, so the other thing we're talking about, how the ear moves up. Just now I was talking about, okay, look at this, okay. The left frequency response, look carefully, is that of what you actually measure on a microphone. The right is what the ear hears. You see it's a lot smoother. The small wrinkles are gone because the ear has this thing called a smoothing function. It simply glosses over these small dips and peaks. So you all know what parametric equalization is. Someone tell me what the Q of the equalization is. Your analog soundboard doesn't have any of this. Equalization here refers more importantly to digital mixers that you'll see in Audio 2 and CPA 2. The equalization, you see the EQ on this is just high, mid, low, basically, right? And you have a few frequency bands you can adjust. On the Yamaha, you can adjust it to any given frequency in a whole audible spectrum. And you can adjust how sharp the boost or dip is. Okay, let me, someone have a pen. Writing material, please. Thank you, that was convenient. This is your loudness, y-axis, your frequency, x-axis, right? So let's say that you have a completely flat frequency response from a microphone. You want to EQ this is not flat, okay, but you get the point. Okay, but like I said, okay, flat doesn't mean a straight line. Flat means actually parallel to the axis. Okay, this is not flat either. You can't have a vertical frequency, it doesn't make any sense. You have to have at least everything in the horizontal axis. Okay, what does a sharp, okay, let's say this is 1000 hertz. Okay, what does a sharp Q equalization do at 1000 hertz? Well, if you bring the Q to max, you'll probably have something like this. So a very sharp Q boost in the 1000 hertz versus a very broad Q. What's a very broad Q boost? Well, something like this. You see what I mean? So sharp Q boost, Q means quality of the boost. Okay, just think of it as how sharp or how narrow the frequencies are affected. So if you want to bring up all the frequencies in that whole area, you generally have a lower Q, a broader boost. And a sharper boost will be a high Q. You have a really, really sharp Q, a very high Q dip. A dip is the exact opposite. So you have a dip at this frequency. You remove that frequency. This is I think you know what this is now. You're gonna hear a difference, but it's not gonna be enough. And for other things, generally, always use a low Q equalization. So how do you tell? You don't need to have golden ears. You think something sounds wrong? Okay. Do you think it's too much frequency or too little frequency? You think it's too harsh? Maybe it's too much frequency at 3000 Hz. So you set the EQ to 3000 Hz on the Yamaha. You really should have done this training in CPA Audio 2. It would have been a lot easier, but unfortunately, I made the wrong decision, so we have to bear the consequences of that. what you will do on the digital mixer, right, where it's like a computer screen in front of you. The mixer is like a mini computer. You will set the frequency, and you'll set a lower Q, a broader dip, and you'll adjust the frequency as you how do I say this? You kind of slide this dip around the whole frequency range as you move the knob. So you adjust the EQ frequency from the lowest frequency to the highest frequency until it sounds right to you. You basically play around until you get it right. Okay, and once you get it right, you start to increase the Q a little bit more until you think it's optimal. This is I don't have a formula for this. You have to listen for yourself. I'll give you a training instruction later how you can practice at home your own ears for EQ. But until then, it's very hard to illustrate to you what exactly this means. Essentially, you are not going to always get it right. If you don't, you just need to trial and error. And if you still don't, maybe just give up on the channel and focus on something else, because later on I'll cover how time-consuming EQ can be. Okay, so don't waste time ironing out minor imperfections. High Q, like I said, very narrow equalizations are basically useless. They are a waste of processing power. Your mixer can't have a million EQs at once. You can only have 4 actually. So you can have one boost in this frequency, one dip, maybe another high shelf and a low shelf. So only 4. You can't have infinite. So if you waste those on little details in the frequency response, you're gonna have trouble later. Okay, let's speed up a little bit. A quick recap. I don't think I really have to go through this too much. We have a lot of time, but you're human. You have to understand what's wrong with your ears, what is so weird about your ears, what's so special about your ears, and how that can play to your advantage, and how you have to be aware of that. It's not like every day you remind yourself what's wrong with my ear, but you get the idea. Okay. Some qualities of the human ear are. Just give me one, please. Sensitive to tweaking. Yes, exactly. It is a flawed frequency response, a very weird frequency response that particularly has a big peak at 3000 Hz. Okay, and also has a very low sensitivity in the bass, which is why humans like a lot of bass. Yeah, it'll kind of all make sense right now. Okay, you know that nobody really complains when there's too much bass. That's not a very you can say the bass is too boomy. That's too much. There's too much upper bass. Too much deep bass, no one will ever complain. Okay, because the human ear is so deaf to bass, right? They won't complain if you have a little bit more. But you have too much 3000 Hz, no one's gonna like you. Okay, moving on. So what exactly is equalization? Well, the manual is at page 10. I should have mentioned this earlier. We actually had other references here. But what exactly is equalization then? Well, I think I already explained it. It's an alteration of the frequency response. Right? Just now I was saying a high Q peak, high Q dip, high Q boost. Boost and peak is the same thing. Okay. Increase or decrease, that's all you can do. Okay. Increase or decrease the frequency. You either put more of that frequency or you take away some of the frequency. Okay. So equalization is just now we illustrated here in terms of the frequency response, which is why I said it was so important that you understood what the frequency response is. And let me give you 2 principles of equalization. This is very important. People love to be carried away with EQ, equalization, because it's such a mystical, enigmatic domain of sound, and people think that it's some artisan technique that they're executing on the audio. Well, let me tell you something. Okay, the first priority you want to get is make sure you're not fooling yourself. Okay. The other day, I think I told some of you might not have been here, that a good test of whether you're actually sane with your hearing is after you're done with your masterful equalization, you've done all your settings, right? You disable the EQ. There's a button on the mixer that lets you disable all the EQ. And you listen again. Does it actually sound better or worse without the EQ? Sometimes your conclusion will be right. It sounds different, but it's not better or worse. You just made a change. So basically, you just wasted your time now. Yeah, sometimes it sounds worse, which unfortunately is often the case, and sometimes it sounds better, which is what I'm trying to get you all to do. So make judicious decisions. Have 2 principles in mind. First principle is to get a flat frequency response. You hear someone speak into a mic and it sounds horrible, it sounds harsh, his voice sounds empty, it sounds very, very muffled, or it sounds very, very bassy, or it sounds just weird. Well, you're gonna have to make it sound correct first before you can add some bass boost or whatever. You don't want to bass boost the voice, but you get my point. You want to fix all the problems before you add on to do your artistic touch. Okay? So that's the first principle, fixing the problems. This is very relevant to natural sounds, which is, give me an example of what's a natural sound. Something that we have a good oral memory of. What's a natural sound? Any example?
Guitar.
Yes, good. And what's an unnatural sound? Well, electronic music, your synthesizer, your anything that is generally even your electronic guitar is quite an artificial sound. You can argue. Some people will not like that argument, but I would argue for that. So you have to pay attention, especially to natural sounds, to make it sound flat, correct, a flat frequency response, not this big peak here and not this big dip. If you have to, if you have to make a peak, it means that there's something wrong with the frequency response. So let's say the frequency response sounds like, this might be a bit confusing, there's many lines, but they're just overlaid on top of each other, so try to imagine that. Let's say it sounds very weird, it has this huge suck out at 1000 Hz. So what do? You EQ an increase at 1000 Hz of the same frequency, so it sounds to be flat. Does that kind of make sense in your minds? If it is lacking in bass, you put more bass to make it sound correct. If it has too much bass, you would do a dip at that bass, at the frequency, to make it even. Okay, you always want to make it as flat as possible. Once there, then you do your artistic touches. That is if you don't have any EQ remaining. Sometimes you run out of all your EQ processing power on the one channel, like I said, only can have 4 EQs. So if you run out of that, too bad, just stay there. You can add some effects later on, reverb, whatever. But first of all, you want to solve the problems. Because if you don't solve the problems, you're just going to be making more problems to yourself with EQ. Yeah, second principle is you don't really care about frequency response. You try to make it sound better. But that is only after you fulfill the first principle. So maybe for electronic music, maybe for background music, you just want to bring up the bass, bring up the treble a little bit to make it, you bring up the treble, it sounds clearer. You bring up the bass, it sounds more impactful, it sounds more, more engaging to the audience. That is not the frequency response, is obviously wrong. When you boost the bass, you know what you're doing? You're messing up the frequency response, but who cares? Like I said, some frequencies sound better than others. Sometimes we like to remove 3000 Hz because it sounds bad, it sounds harsh, at a louder volume. So that is the second principle of perfection, not perfection, as in creativity. That's your creative element. That's up to you. I'm not going to tell you what to do there. But the first principle is to iron out any main problems with the sound. Iron it out, make it sound flat in frequency response, and then you move on lah. Yeah, so let's move on to the identifying flaws in frequency response. Well, you all know the term boomy, just a mouthful, shrill. We'll illustrate it later, that's what we're going to do in, hopefully if we have a little bit of time left. Yeah, that is your, you can put it in words. Everyone knows these words. Oh, it sounds painful, it sounds bright, it sounds harsh, it sounds, I can't hear, it sounds so muffled. Right? But your job as a sound man, what is it? It's not just to scream muffled, muffled, muffled to the whole crowd. Okay? It's to tell yourself, to translate it to an actual frequency. And I think we've covered this before. Muffled generally means a lack in treble. Boomy probably means an increase in upper bass. And if you turn to page 11, equalization, you will see that little graph, that little chart there telling you exactly generally what the terms are. It's not an exhaustive list, it's not definitive by any means, but it's a good idea of what you have in your mind. So you hear something, you hear it in your mind, you have a character for it, you put it down on the EQ in a frequency, and you move the frequency around, up and down, until you find the right frequency. Okay, easier said than done. Like I said, sometimes when the sound sounds really, really bad, it can be a combination of excesses and dips. So it can be a frequency response graph with like this. Okay, you know what I mean, okay? There's a whole host of problems. It gets pretty bad sometimes, but most of the time we assume that we have a good system, we have a good microphone, there won't be any problems. There will only be problems with frequency response if your whole system is wrong in the first place. Which unfortunately is kind of the case with some of the places in our school. So, but as you work more with the venues, I kind of get used to it, you know what exactly is wrong. I'm not going to make a list here, but it's a pretty standard set of problems, and hopefully eventually we'll get to fixing them with the problems. But for now, just bear those in mind. And how to practice EQ? Well, you're on Spotify, you all listen to music, you probably listen to music, I don't know. And on Spotify, there's this thing called the equalization, I don't use Spotify. But equalization, I think you all know that it's there, right? There's some things you can adjust the sound in Spotify. It's a very simple, I think it's just 5 different frequencies, but you get a good idea of how, yeah, it's okay, you'll find it. Just play around on your phone. You don't need to have a studio monitor to tell you what EQ is. You can just listen to the. On some Samsung phones, right? On the training manual, I think there's even this little footnote at the bottom that says you have a Samsung phone. But I'm not sure if it's. My phone has that. I'm not sure if your phone has it. Yeah. Basically, this is just when you listen to music, go and play around with the faders on the different frequencies, and you will generally get used to. What each frequency stands for. Don't go listening to a sign, the pure the tones and memorizing the frequency, okay? That won't get you anywhere. It will get you somewhere, but it's generally a massive waste of time. Yeah, if someone here has perfect pitch, I'm sorry, you're not very special because it's not going to help you in EQ that much. Compared to someone who knows how frequencies interact with each other when you have a complex music and you EQ the whole thing together. Okay, practical considerations, it's a little bit long, but yeah, basically, I'm just going to kind of read it out for you. Okay, I think we touched on these a little bit just now. If you don't know how to EQ, don't EQ. You're just going to waste your time and you're going to confuse yourself because your ear is going to be more and more discombobulated by the various changes you're making, and you're going to lose yourself, you make a little change, does it sound better or does it sound worse? And you don't know, and maybe at the end of the day you realize the whole EQ is actually off. It's possible. You know what's placebo, right? Where you think someone gives you a bottle of water and say this bottle is worth $10,000, and you drink it and you think like you're going to heaven. Well, it's actually just water from the faucet. So same for EQ, you have to make sure you're not fooling yourself. If it doesn't mean you don't EQ. Okay, EQ is very important, very, very important, but if done wrongly, it can be a nightmare and a huge waste of time. Okay. The last thing that the person on stage wants to see, right, is the soundman staring at the soundboard, fixated on the screen without caring anything on outside world and trying to dial in a little bit of EQ, while all heaven is breaking loose outside of the auditorium. So you have to be situationally aware, make your priorities clear. If the whole show is falling apart, there's only 10 minutes for sound check, you're not going to want to EQ, you just want to make the show go, you just want to make the show run, right? You want to make it work. EQ comes generally later on. You can even EQ during the show, but try not to do that because people will probably notice, hey, why the sound changing? It suddenly becomes clearer. Yeah, equalization can be very time consuming. We said it can create more problems than it solves. Poor EQ can create a great source of confusion. The test disable the EQ and compare with and without, okay? And there's no universal EQ. I know a lot of people like to say, oh, you go into the show, there's always increase the treble bit and reduce the 3K, why not? Because people don't like 3K, right? Maybe increase the bass a little bit, and well, that's the universal EQ. But wrong. Don't go into that conception. Don't go in and start dialing EQ before they even start singing on a microphone. That's just well, if you know a venue has problems like this place has too much bass towards the back, you might want to do a bit of EQ before they even start because you know how it's gonna sound like already. But generally, don't jump to conclusions and don't let those conclusions guide what you think the sound is like. If you think the sound is gonna be too bright, then maybe your brain will tell you that it's too bright, but it's actually not. That's placebo. Yeah. So and we talked about how don't equalize individually. Don't ask them to play one by one. They won't like you, and you wouldn't like to spend so much time doing that either. And minimalism is the key. Okay, try to be efficient in what you do, because the problem is, like listen carefully. The problem is usually not as bad as you think it is. Sometimes, right, I can tell you that I've had people spend so much time going after a whole host of problems. Actually, just one single frequency that's the issue. Yeah. So yeah, that's it for theory. We have exactly a grand total of 10 minutes to do our practical listening. So that's it. Yeah.